So when I learned to knit, I was trying to learn from a book, and the hardest thing I thought was the cast on. And if you can't cast on, you can't do anything. So I'm going to go very slowly right now over our cast on so that you can learn how to do it, learn how to make it stretchy enough that you can actually work into your stitches, because that was my problem. I couldn't get into a stitch to save my life. It was so tight and I didn't know why, because the book doesn't tell you, it just tells you how to do it. It doesn't give you any kind of pointers. So I'm going to give you some pointers so that you can, actually work into it a lot easier. Okay, so to start off, we're going to take our yarn and our needle. I'm using a 10mm double pointed needle, or DPN. That means there's points on both ends. These are mostly used when you're working in the round or making an I-cord. That way, when you learn that, you'll understand what that's for. Normally, like if you're doing a flat, rectangular straight project where you're not working in the round, you're working in rows, you would use like a straight needle like this with an end on it. This is really large, so it's difficult to do in the camera, so that's why I'm using the shorter DPNs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's called a Longtail Cast on. This is kind of the cast on that most people use for everyday projects. Unless you need to make something fancy, usually the pattern will call for it. Longtail cast on is kind of like a go-to cast on. There are so many different knitting cast-ons, it's crazy. One of the things that's great about crochet is that you have chains. You have chains, or you have your foundation, single, double, half double crochet. You have two ways to start your project, and that's it. Knitting, way more. So I'm going to show you how to do the Longtail cast on. I am going to kind of start it, and then I'll explain what's going on so we can start with a little bit. So the first thing that I do is I kind of make a long tail, okay? I'll explain the long tail in a second. Then I'm going to do a slip knot. So I'm just going to turn my yarn down. So my working yarn is in this hand. Grab it, turn it down, reach through to that working yarn attached to my ball and pull that through. So just like a slip knot for crochet, same for knitting. So I slide it on, and I have my tail in front, and I have my working yarn in the back. Now, the reason my tail is so long is because I'm going to use it to create stitches on my needle. How long does it need to be? That depends on how many stitches you're making. You want, a good rule of thumb is about 1 inch for every stitch you need to cast on. So thinking of it this way as a crocheter, when you're making your foundation chains, so say you're going to make a scarf that is 24 foundation chains wide, you will do the same in knitting, but it's called casting on. So you're going to cast on 24 stitches instead of chaining 24. Same concept. So that would mean, if I'm using that rule of thumb, I'm going to need a 24-inch tail, because you're going to see how this gets used up as I make my stitches. So 24 inches plus about 6, or however many inches you need to weave in your ends. Okay, I'll go in more how you can get that more accurate a little bit later after we get going. This is going to be my very first stitch, so if it says cast on 20 stitches, this is number 1 of 20. So we count the slip knot as a stitch. Okay, so now we need to do the grip. So I have my tail yarn in the front, I have my working yarn in the back. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch my fingers together and insert them between the two. Then I'm going to use my other 3 fingers and I'm going to grab both ends. So I got 2 between, the other 3 are grabbing. And then I'm just going to spread those fingers out. And now I'm in my Longtail Cast on grip. Okay, so when we are in our Longtail grip, you're going to notice 3 strands of yarn. Obviously it's just 2 full strands, but we're going to call this strand 1 below our thumb, strand 2 above our thumb, and then strand 3 that's coming over here to our pointer, just to make it a little bit easier to understand what the needle's doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the needle towards me, and I'm going to go under strand 1. So I reach under, and then I'm going to go above strand 2, and you'll see that I've created kind of this little loop with my thumb and my needle. Then I'm going to come over here to strand 3 from the top and grab it and bring it back through that loop that I created, and then I'm going to release my thumb. I'm going to use my thumb with my tail yarn that's still in front, and I'm going to tighten that loop that I just made. Now I have 2 stitches on my needle. Again, bring the needle towards you, go under strand 1, over strand 2, grab strand 3 from top to bottom and bring it through, release the thumb, use it to tighten your loop. So when you're doing it normal style, or normal speed, it's going to look like this, so that you can kind of just easily have your hand ready for your next one. Now, some tips that I want to point out: when you're making your loops, keep them separated. So I could make this loop and tighten it down right next to the previous loop. That is going to be so difficult to work into when I actually want to go make my stitches. These little loops that I have here, where there is some space between each one, is going to give me slack to be able to insert my needle when I go to work my stitch, which you'll see in the next video when we actually do the knit stitch. So when you're making your loops, this was the #1 problem that I had when I was learning. I was just making them like this. I was sticking them, tightening them all down next to each other, and I could not work into my cast on. I could never get past the cast on because they were too tight. So give yourself some room, give yourself some slack, pull it out if you do it too tight, and just spread them out a little. So again, you have your grip, bring it towards you, go under the first strand, over the second strand, grab that third strand, and bring it back through. Release the thumb and tighten down. So let's look at it at maybe a different angle just so you can see it. So I'm going under, over, grabbing, bringing it back. Release and tighten. Just keep on sliding them down your needle. Again, let's try maybe this way here so you can kind of see how it looks. So it's going over and grabbing, and then pulling it back through. Now I said, let's talk about this long tail. So when you are pulling your tail out, you need to be conscious of how many stitches you need on your needle to figure out how much you should pull out. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can guesstimate. You can just start pulling some, pull way more than you think you need, and then just trim off what's left over. But I am way too yarn, I don't like having long tails that I have to cut off. I feel like I'm wasting yarn, so I don't really like that one. The next best option is to pull out about 1 inch of yarn for every stitch you need. So that's more for like worsted weight yarn. You'll want to go a little higher for bulky and super bulky, a little less for DK or lace or sock weight, but about 1 inch a stitch can get you pretty close, and then just add about 6 inches for weaving in. So if you need to make 12 cast on stitches, you'll pull out 12 inches and then another 6 or however many you need to weave in, so for a total of about 18 inches. That is probably a better option than just guesstimating and yanking out yarn. Then there's the third most accurate way to do it. So usually, if you're doing like a 12 stitch, it's not a big deal. If you run out, you can easily pull it out and redo it. But if you have like a huge rectangular scarf you're making and you need to cast on 200 stitches, you don't want to have to do it more than once. You don't want to accidentally get too little of yarn, so you want to be a little bit more accurate. So the best thing to do is to kind of do a multiple. So if you have 200, cast on about 10 stitches, then pull it off your needle, keep track. So like if this was 10 stitches here, keep track of these two ends, pull this out, pull it out, and measure it. How many inches did it take you to make 10 stitches? And then multiply that measurement by 20 and pull that many inches of yarn out. So that's kind of the most accurate way. Don't forget to add, 4 to 6 inches for weaving in. But if you had a huge amount of cast on stitches, that is going to guarantee you that you're not going to run out. So how do I count these once I cast on? Easy, you just count your loops. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And that's how many I wanted to make for our training of knit stitches. So we're going to move on to our knit stitch, and that's all for now.